The Brothers Wisp. The Brothers Wisp, Brothers Wisp. The Brothers Wisp. The Brothers.
You're now listening to Greg. It's the Brothers Wisp. Let's take a ride through space.
Hey everybody,
on this
is
mothership.
Greg with the Brothers Wisp, number 89. I'm starting to contemplate whether I should change the way I intro these things. I'm getting too predictable. Everybody knows what's coming. Let's see. Today we have Thomas. All he is a little head bubble today.
Hello, everyone. And it seems most of the people just listen anyway, so...
I know, but you're depriving me of the interesting facial hair you constantly change.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Greg.
I know. You got to quit thinking about yourself and start thinking about others for once.
That's true.
And Thomas is calling us all the way from Slovakia, right?
Yeah, currently the world's place to be for ice hockey.
Really?
The Ice Hockey World Championship is going on in Slovakia right now.
I didn't even know
for
that
the
was
next
a
2
thing.
weeks.
Ah, cool. Are you going to that?
No. I don't enjoy watching sports. I used to play a lot of ice hockey, but for some reason I just don't watch sports. So, no, not for me.
It's almost like you have better things to do.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah. Also joining us today, and he's full screen video this go around. It's Nick. Where are you out of, Nick?
Illinois,
Illinois.
USA.
Awesome. Blow me away there, Nick.
No problem.
You make it sound such a wonderful place.
It's not Chicago, but I guess I'm within the radius, so I'll just say Chicago area.
That'll work. How often do you go into the city?
Not often.
All right.
Don't have much time, but there's a lot of train stations that'll take me right up to Chicago if I wanted to go there, but pretty busy.
All right, fair enough. I guess I'm just the one with all the free time on my hands. So let's get the dirty work out of the way. Pennytone is sponsoring this one. He didn't give us a deal of the month or week or anything like that, so I'm just going to make stuff up off the cuff. Pennytone is a hosted VoIP solution. They are the easy button as far as getting phones turned up. So if you want to add phones, or you say, I think really, if you've got a business customer, you want them to have a phone system, have it as easy as possible, you can refer them over that direction and just be done with it. Just wipe your hands of the whole filthy situation, and you'll be happier for it. So let's see, what else do we have? Let's jump right into it. Let's do that. We have Jim Jones. We recorded a tips video with him, and super nice guy. That was the first time I've ever actually got to talk to him. And I don't know. It's funny sometimes. You know, I would say 90% of the people in the Slack, I know them based on their little icon, their tiny icon, right? And so you just, I don't know, make assumptions about people. But when I started talking to him, he was just like this very gentle guy, very kind. I like that. Not to say that I thought he was going to be a dirtbag or anything, but it's just I thought it was interesting. He had a lot of really good tips. You know what I found to be really interesting are the people whose tips are really about building other folks up. And I was listening to a podcast with Dr. Drew. I would ask Nick if he remembers Dr. Drew. You may not be old enough. He did Loveline and stuff like that. Is that a thing for you? You look confused.
Not really.
All right. I doubt Thomas ever watched Dr. Drew. Did you?
Well, I mean, we had communism at that point, so I'm sure there was a Russian equivalent to that somewhere.
Anyway, he's a really interesting cat. He's a internal medicine guy, but he also did, and I guess probably still does, a lot of drug rehabilitation for people and stuff like that. And he was talking about how when you want people to make, I know this sounds like I'm going off the rails here, but he's talking about people with addiction problems. If you want them to make a functional change, that's all in their mind, right? They have to make that shift in their mind. And he was saying, if you just tell somebody to do things, it's never going to work, right? Because that part of their brain that's addicted will say, no, that's not what we want, and so it goes in one ear and one out the other. But he was saying what you have to do is you have to be kind of nurturing in those relationships with people. When you want them to actually make a change, you have to sit down and say, man, what you're going through really sucks. And, I understand where you're at, and that, and that's really lame, maybe we could talk about it. And so you just, you empathize with them, you put yourself in their situation, and then you can make gentle pushes in one direction or another. And I was thinking, because after that Jim Jones video, somebody commented about, how much they've learned from that guy. I was thinking, that's probably intuitive for a lot of people, but it wasn't always for me. That, trying to put yourself in somebody's situation and then making gentle recommendations is probably the best way to help mentor those. And most of the people I've ever met that I feel like are mentors, I guess, intuitively do that. I always thought that was interesting. I don't know if you guys have run into that. Is that how you approach all of your situations, David from LA?
Well, I guess it depends on the situation. You guys know, at times I do have a hot head. Sometimes I think before I talk before I think.
I've never heard that.
But I don't know, when it's a more serious note. In tough situations where I don't have any good advice, in a case where you can't give any good advice because of an unfortunate situation, I mean, the only thing I try to do is just be positive, try to validate their feelings. That's really an important one I've learned. Just validate feelings, let them know you understand. Well, if I can understand, I will understand. I'll just let them know I understand what you're going through. I know it's hard, things like that. But and if there is advice I could give, like my wife's nephew, we're close with him. He's a really nice kid. He's good. He's also, well, he's not a pro hockey player, but he's definitely up there, up and coming. NHL is looking at him. Whoops, hold on, let me turn off the radio. And yeah, a lot of times he needs advice on what to do, because the family he comes from, well, the father is basically a criminal, so he doesn't have any father figures or any male role models to look at. And I wouldn't consider myself a role model, but I try to point them in the right direction as much as possible. And so far, it seems to have been working. He's doing all right.
Tiny noses.
He's a good kid, though. He doesn't really have any major issues. So cool.
Well, once you're done with him, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, it's funny enough. The mistakes I've made, I try to coax people into not making the mistakes I've made. Namely with girls, but sometimes with money. Yeah, that's pretty much it. If I could do things over again, that's kind of the advice I would give someone. If they ask, if they don't ask, then I don't say a word. But when they do ask, it's just the way I would have done it if I had to do it over. Because there's a few things in my life I say I do over. Not too many, just maybe one or two. But if that comes up, I'll give them my 2 cents.
Gotcha. Something, and I'll derail it for only like another 30 seconds. Something else that came up in that podcast that I thought was fascinating was they were talking about addicts. And so I come from a long line of alcoholics, on both sides, and with a good smackling of crack addiction and methamphetamine use. We like to diversify our portfolio. But they were talking about those sorts of personalities. A lot of that's genetic, right? There's like a bit that's flipped in your packet that, can make you more predisposed to addiction or whatever. And they were saying that he's found a correlation in people who are like subjugated or under great duress, like groups of people, like you had the Scottish and then the Irish and then like Native Americans here in the States. And they were saying that, when they've done some research with those people, they'll say, okay, imagine, if you will, you're on this battlefield, and then all of a sudden these people are coming at you with spears. What do you do? And he said, the average human would have their fight or flight kick in and they would run away. But they said those people with that bit flipped, a lot of them will grab the nearest, biggest, heaviest thing and then run at the attacker. And they were saying that maybe that's some kind of genetic thing that helps them, instead of catching a spear in the back, maybe they, can conquer their foes, sort of thing. I thought that was really interesting that, as a society gets oppressed, that it's just kind of interesting that, well, they said also that like those people, a lot of times when they're under heavy duress, their mind clears, you know, and everything, they can just sort of focus. And I thought I've been in some situations where I find myself under heavy duress, and that's when I'm at my calmest. And I was thinking, oh, I wonder if that, maybe that does track a little bit. Who's to say?
Just last thing, I am, or maybe I was, maybe I still am, I don't know, a big Tony Robbins fan. I read all his books. I really did like him.
Yes, I know. You talk about him. I mean, I've seen the picture of him in your wallet. Everybody gets it. You love Tony Robbins.
I don't have a picture of him in my wallet. But anyway, there is one thing I do remember that he said, and it really holds true, I think. What do you guys think? His whole premise is, what do you associate pleasure and pain to? Because that's what's going to ultimately, unconsciously maybe help, or that's how you make your decisions. We tend to move away from pain and towards pleasure. That's a very primitive way to look at it. I think decisions are a lot more complex, but at the core of it, he gives examples of like people in the gym. You know, you see somebody lifting heavy weights and it does not look like they're having a good time. You know, they're making noises. Their face looks like someone's stabbing them in the throat. And they sit and they do it over and over and over again, year after year. And that, to most of us, is painful. But to the bodybuilder, that's pleasurable. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, that's the tenet of some of the sales training I've read before, is that's how people make their buying decisions. They're either moving away from pain or they're moving towards pleasure, right? Moving away from pain, I guess, is the stronger one, right?
Well, that
I'm
seems
about
to work with marketing.
Yeah, like if I need to buy something, what would be moving away from pain? My garbage disposal is broke. I need a new one, right? Sort of thing. Or, you know, my hot water heater busted, or my air conditioner's broke. You know, you're going to get that fixed really quick. You're moving away from pain. Or, you know, moving towards pleasure would be like buying that sports car, right? And so buying a sports car is probably harder to rationalize for most people versus the moving away from pain thing. So if you can find pain, you can, you know, sort of massage the scenario a little bit.
It's funny you say sports car, because a friend of mine is considering getting that new Corvette that came out. That's a mid-engine. It costs something like $70,000, but with all the nannies and whistles put in, it's $80,000. And he's like, man, that thing is so cool. I can't wait to get it. And I'm thinking in my head, man, that sounds like a nightmare, because where could you park that? You're always going to worry about someone dinging it, scratching it, a bird shitting on it. You know, so he sees that as pleasurable. I see it as a big pain in the ass. So
that guy must be a real driver, huh?
I see someone spoke to you. I see someone spoke to you.
It may have come up in a conversation or two.
At the moment, even.
That guy is a driver.
Good
That's
time.
an inside joke, guys.
All right, so we talked about the tips video. That's groovy. That's up and rocking. Let's talk about some actual industry stuff, seeing as I've already lost everybody. Cambium just dropped CNheat, which I think is fairly interesting. So it's a new RF planning service. They're saying that it's using GIS data down to 1 meter precision. They're saying, in their marketing video, they said globe. They didn't just say North America. They said across the globe. So I'm sure your mileage may vary a bit across the globe, but I'm assuming they're going to focus on North America for sure. So it looks pretty interesting. The idea being, right, that anybody in your tech department, or I guess theoretically sales, could catch a call from a potential client, and within, 30 seconds or a minute, you can somewhat accurately say, yeah, it really does look like we can get you service, or no, we can't get you service, based on where your infrastructure is at. They're saying it's going to support the 5 gigahertz and the 3 gigahertz 5 gigahertz line of sight and 3 gigahertz non-line of sight equipment. And it looks like they have web-based and optimized for mobile as well. I'm not sure if there's an app for mobile or if it's just optimized for mobile as well, which is pretty neat. I don't see any pricing. I don't see how they're going to make it just for Cambium people, or maybe they're not going to bother trying to just, money is money. I don't know if they're going to, maybe if you're like some kind of Cambium customer of record or something, then they'll sell it to you. I don't know. I don't know anything else about it other than that. What do you guys think? Have you looked at it a little bit, seen some of the marketing?
I haven't seen much, but there aren't a lot of tools out there for the industry. There's pretty much one tool most people use. So it'd be nice to have some competing products for this type of mapping and maybe even for FCC paperwork.
Yeah, and from what I understand, some of the other competing products or the competitor out there, they may not have accurate data in all areas, and even some areas might be extremely inaccurate. So
All right.
them saying down to 1 meter everywhere is pretty enticing, I would think.
More tools, the better.
Well, what about Ubiquiti? I thought Ubiquiti had something where it would tell you if there's any obstructions, which radios you're using.
Well, here's the
configurator.
Here's the trick. This is tying in GIS information, so it's like topological information. So it theoretically down to 1 meter knows, what the terrain looks like, buildings in that area, and we'll sort of take all of that into account.
I did see a website. I got to pull it up, but there was a website when I was looking at doing a line of just a point-to-point shot from the top of a mountain. There was one mountain that may or may not have obstructed, so I went on. I forget the website, but I'll try to find a few because I saved the screenshots, and it was able to show that the mountain that was in front of where we were putting a dish, it showed that we cleared it. And it shows you on the map the point-to-point elevation. And we cleared it, and it was right. We did clear it. But I'll probably post that.
That's probably a little easier to do with just terrain information as opposed to, hey, you're in an urban environment and there might be a building here.
All right.
Oh,
that's the big thing.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder if Google Maps has that kind of information, because when you go to 3D view, you could actually see skyscrapers and whatnot in cities.
I don't think it's public. From what I've talked to with people that build these types of platforms, actually getting the terrain data is pretty expensive. There's only a few companies that actually collect the data. So I can see why there's not like a ton of competing products, just because getting your hands on the accurate mapping data, especially with like elevation everywhere, there's tons and tons of data, and it's very expensive to enter into that space.
It's so weird because, that's pretty much just your basic aviation charts. They will tell you if there's obstructions. They actually tell you how high it is and where the ground is below it, how many feet below is the ground.
Yeah, but stuff changes. Buildings are put in, geography changes. Keeping up-to-date maps keeps the tool accurate. So
yeah, I'm talking about they have that on aviation maps. When I used to have to look at them, you would see, there's a pole over here, there's a tower over here. And it would tell you how tall the tower is, and it would tell you from the top of the tower to the ground what's that distance and the elevation of both. So
I wonder how often they refresh information on those sorts of services.
I'm not sure.
God, that for aviation, I know it's once a quarter.
Oh, well, that's pretty.
Once a quarter, you got to get new maps. Yeah,
that's pretty frequent. I was just, I was thinking about, trees grow, right? So
not that fast.
No, yeah. But if your information's 5 years old, that could be. That could theoretically cut off a neighborhood or something that you previously would have been able to service.
True.
It's also taking that data and combining it with like RF propagation, especially with specific antennas and equipment. So there isn't a lot of competition out there. So I think the more tools, the better. So it's cool that Cambium is kind of stepping into that area. We'll see how feature-packed it is.
I'm sure they'll be keen to tell everybody about the performance, get some use cases out there. So I assume we'll hear something soon.
I think it just depends on how many things they want to do. Like for link calculation with geographical or topographical data, you have actually a bunch of those. Like even RF Elements has a full-featured link calculator with topography and signal propagation and everything. Ubiquiti also has full topography. How accurate it is and how often it is updated is of course debatable, but there is a bunch of services out there, or a bunch of link calculators / link planners you can use for this. It just depends on, for building data, that's a completely different story, of course. So I think it really just depends on how much stuff or how many features they want to put into it.
Yeah, and this one's kind of your traditional heat map is what it looks like, right? So you've got an overlay of you looking down on the terrain, and you can kind of see they color the areas that they think you can get access to, sort of like that. So it makes it easy for dummies, not just, kind of point-to-point link calculation. I guess it's...
Especially if you can slap your whole infrastructure in there and look at all your towers at an overview or something, if that's going to be possible.
That's kind of
I
cool.
think that's what people are looking for, is something that they can put their infrastructure in and keep that up to date, but kind of look at an overall heat map of what their potential overlaps are and frequency planning and things like that.
Yeah, and none of this is going to be perfect, right? There's no guarantees associated with any of it, but, if it's 90% accurate, that's pretty good. I think it could save you some time, save you some truck rolls, sort of things. You guys ready to switch gears? Ubiquiti announced Unifi Access. So it's an access control system doing strikes and mags, which I think is interesting. You guys ever do any access control stuff? The crickets are chirping. I do a pretty decent chunk of, at least I have for a long time, a pretty decent chunk of access control systems, all the way from EST to software house, the secure systems, as well as a little bit of looking at the ZK access stuff, which is very affordable, and some various other ones, right? So the idea being you put like a magnetic lock or a electric strike in your door.
Okay.
And
so like building access stuff.
Yeah, access control to physically get in and out of a building. And so it looks like rolling into the Unifi ecosystem is going to be Unifi Access. So this sort of is interesting because, they used to do, MFi, which was kind of data acquisition stuff with temperature probes and things like that. And that's been shuttered. It's been sundowned for a while. But they've just recently started doing the Unifi LED lights, right, that are PoE powered. And this rolls into that. I guess it kind of tags into that. So it sounds like they really want to control everything in your office building as far as that goes. And so this is going to be, they've announced 3 products. The UA Pro, says powered by UA Hub NFC reader, supports unlocking via mobile access, equipped with high-resolution camera and display to provide two-way intercom. So it looks almost like, you remember that, what was that weird medallion thing people would wear? The Unifi thing.
Oh, I remember that.
Whatever
Can't
that.
remember what it was for.
It looks very similar to that. It's got a little camera at the top, and I guess a little screen so that you can have kind of a two-way conversation and then, fire to unlock or lock our door back. They also have a UA light, which is just a little NFC reader. So it's very small, kind of pill-shaped device, probably 4 inches tall, maybe an inch wide, something like that. And then they have what they call the hub. So this is the piece of kit that actually has the relays in there and probably the contacts. So the relays are going to control the locks. The contacts will be, is the door closed or not. Offers 4 inputs for convenient motion sensors. So motion sensor, that's going to be a REX, request to exit, and a push to exit button. Generally in an access control scenario, you will have a REX, which is a motion sensor up at the top, or a peer sensor, and then you'll also have a button. Usually that's per code. The idea being if your motion sensor fails and somebody needs to egress, they have a button they can push to get out. Right in North America, per fire code, you always have to be able to egress. So people always have to be able to get out, right? Not necessarily in, but if your building's on fire, you probably want the fire department to be able to get in. Otherwise, they're going to find their own way in very forcibly. I think it's interesting. I would play with some of this kit just to see what it could do. I always like looking at new stuff. I know, like Mikrotik used to say about other people trying to do routers, it's a long hill to climb because there's been a lot of other people doing access control for a really long time. So they've got market share on it, but I guess it's the integration piece, right? Everything all in the Unifi controller, all built into one, is what they're shooting for. It could be interesting, especially for small offices and light installations where you just got a couple of few doors. Maybe even put these on a conference room sort of thing, So if you're scheduled for the conference room, you can blop in and it allows you access sort of thing. Or co-working spaces, those are starting to get a lot more popular, right? Do you guys have any of those?
Oh, yeah.
I bet.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, I'm sure you have tons of those out in LA. The idea being you need to rent an office for a day or an hour or 2 hours or whatever. And
well, they do it by the month. They want to get you on a monthly subscription, but it's like the 2 big ones are WeWork and Regus.
Gotcha. Well, we've seen some flexible ones, wherein, especially around like downtowns where there's a courthouse, because lawyers come in and out,
yeah.
and they just need a little a place to maybe work for a week or something while they're doing a case. Then they'll lease the space out where you get like Wi-Fi access and a private office, maybe a conference room, something like that. I could see it theoretically being useful. I would beta test it maybe just to see what it's doing.
They're not cheap, believe me. I've looked at the only two I know about is WeWork and Regis, and when I was looking for office space, I mean, they were not cheap at all. So both of them basically had the same things to offer. The smallest office, if you want your own office, was $1,000 a month, and they want you to sign like a 1 or 2 year. I was like, no way. Yeah. Otherwise, you could go month to month. With, I think, WeWork, but then you get the common area, which is where all the kids are talking about their screenplays that are going to hit big and whatnot, and it's noisy. So,
yeah, LA sounds like a different model, at least around here. And some of the ones I've seen in Austin, yeah, they're like by the day sort of affairs most of the time. That's cool. Yeah. And they've made it really easy. You basically just go to a website, put in your information, your credit card, they'll blop you a code, and you show up, punch it in, and you're going to town. It's pretty neat.
That's awesome.
I wonder if this is going to be a self-hosted product or cloud only for their access hardware.
I have no idea. I think it's in the beta store right now. Other than that, I don't know anything about it. I don't know pricing. I don't know if they're planning on extending this or, I don't have a clue. It looks like the hub that's actually doing the access control functions powered by 802.3 BT PoE++. So looks like it requires a little bit of juice, but it is still a PoE product.
It looks pretty cool, man. That's especially for all the guys out there that are doing those lighting up those buildings. Well, it's probably residential, right? But hey, it's nice to know there's a product out there that'll do it all, at least to start off with.
Yeah, I know some of this can be kind of sticky. I think it goes state to state, but depending on where you are in the U.S., you sometimes have to have a license to be able to install access control stuff. That kind of falls under security systems, right? Where you have to be licensed for that stuff. Yeah, so
you got to be bonded.
It could be kind of a gray area.
Some of those might have to go through compliance stuff for insurance too, because if somehow this gets exploited and someone gets into your house and steals stuff, some of these systems in some areas I think have to go through like some kind of compliance certification for insurance to still cover stolen goods if like this was installed in a residential location.
Gotcha.
I'm curious how that's going to be.
And I know some of at least I know this isn't really the market they're shooting for, but in the data center world, sometimes access control, depending on the client type and their restrictions, they, like the authentication methods have to meet certain security standards and things like that.
Right.
And so, the backends have to be stored in a certain, just all of that can be kind of a messy gray area. So I guess if this is probably your private office, you'll probably be okay for the most part. But that's interesting with the insurance aspect. I hadn't even thought about that part of it.
Well, for me, there's two things here. So usually, at least here in Slovakia, most of the time when you are installing a system like this, you use it for access control, but also for like so basically to get timesheets out of it of who entered and when, and you track attendance to work as well as access control. Basically any system that doesn't have both features here will probably not be looked at because we have a very bureaucratic system of how our employment works. You use this for timesheets as well, and we actually installed a few systems like these at a few clients, and we also did a few hotels, which is a different kind of access control, of course. It wasn't me personally doing this, but for me with Ubiquiti there is two things. First of all, this is actually quite expensive. Like if I compare it to the products that we were installing for our clients, those were quite a bit cheaper. So that might be just the market targeting thing where Ubiquiti is targeting this at the US, where prices for things like these are very different. But for our part of the world, this is quite expensive. And the second of all is, do you really want Ubiquiti to control access to your building? with their software history and with their project abandonment history. I mean, if you are going to install this should last for years upon years, right? It's not simple to change an access control system, specifically if you have to, re-import all the people and their access rights and everything that comes with it. And if Ubiquiti decides to stop supporting this a year or 2 years, into the product lifecycle, like they did with MFi and so many other of their product experiments, do you really want to take the chance with the history of Ubiquiti products? And maybe it's cloud only for now, and already on the beta store there, there are many asterisks and many, this will be coming in the future, and we are planning to add that. And you buy it, and they stop supporting the on-site deployment, and you have to migrate to cloud only or stuff like that. We've all been there. Ubiquiti has done that to previous products, right? So do you really want to take the chance? And I suppose the answer is to everybody to answer to that.
I think something that popped in my head when you were talking about the pricing is you're also paying for convenience here, right? So the Unifi interface will do all of the things theoretically, right? It'll do your cameras, it'll do your Wi-Fi, you can do your security gateway, and now you can do your access control, kind of all in one. And I guess if you were to look at most of Ubiquiti's products that are on kind of that Unifi platform, if you went and found a single product from somebody else, you could probably get it cheaper. Like the ZK Access stuff is going to be cheaper than this, right? And they've got a track record, and they've been doing it for a long time, and there's long-term support associated with that, right? Or if you wanted to just get a Unifi replacement, you could go and get access points, like an equivalent product that might be a little bit cheaper, right? So I guess it's, to me, the whole idea of having it a little bit more expensive is you're paying for the convenience, right? It's a convenience price.
Well, yeah, they're also a publicly traded company and have to show profits, so they're going to come out with new products that may or may not be directly related, like their solar panels. Whatever happened to that? That was like a thing for like a hot minute and disappeared pretty quick. So
didn't do too well. And I think they're re-engineering it still, and they plan on relaunching it, but they had a lot of issues with the big deployments that people were putting out.
Well, I think
it just wasn't ready.
Part of the solar thing, I think, was there was just a lot of confusion among, right? So it's a wireless ISP company selling these solar panels. So I think most people operated on the assumption, hey, you guys are putting out a product for us to put at solar sites, and that is 100% not what that product was for. It was for retrofitting people's homes to sell back to the electrical companies. Well, there's only a few states that really give you incentives to do that, and so there was only really a handful of areas that it financially made sense to do that in. Most states, you weren't going to make your money back, or some states don't even allow you to feed back into the grid, right? And you get kind of a discount sort of. So it just, I don't know. I think there was just a lot of confusion. They just didn't clearly articulate what that product was for, and I think some people even that did understand how it was made, they were in a state where it didn't really work. Like I was looking in Texas, obviously, because that's where I'm at, and it's like the model didn't really work here, so it was unfortunate. There were a few states where it did work, and I'm sure worked well, but this just wasn't one of them.
But what confuses me about that whole scenario is that a company as big as Ubiquiti, with all the R&D they have, with all the legal stuff they have, and the lawyers working with them, and they, I'm sure they do focus groups and market research before they deploy a product. Like, how did they not see this coming? Like, this is not the first product they've ever let out. They're a pretty well-established company in the industry. So it's kind of concerning that they could put out a product that would flop so fast.
Well, there's another thing too, is like recently, because of like solar technology, I have a buddy that lives in Arizona that's been working on a project of making a little microcontroller to control like HVAC systems, because there's some areas right now, especially like Arizona area, where the utility bills are extremely high and they have like metered pricing on electrical. So he says, every couple of months there's another neighbor in his area that just bought tens of thousands of dollars of solar to try to circumvent the bill, but they end up paying the same per month anyway, paying off the solar systems. But I think because the technology is more readily available, they saw it as an opportunity to sell, because there's tons of people spending tens of thousands to outfit their home to try to deal with that problem. So it was probably a good time to get in. Same thing with the security system. Like even Amazon has that thing you can install where an Amazon delivery, somebody can come in and hit the button, put your package in. So I'm sure more products are going to be coming out like that, especially with like the security doorbells and stuff. A bunch of people are making it, so they probably figured why not jump into this market, tied in with our cloud key, so you have a good interface. I mean, that's why people like, Cisco's doing the Meraki stuff. It's easier for people to do cloud hosted or like a full solution through a web GUI, and they can just add, building access, cameras, whatever.
Yeah.
So I see why they're doing it. It's just,
I think if you step back and look at Ubiquiti's model, I think it's actually pretty interesting. So they do have an R&D department. It's called All Their Customers. So, they come up with an idea like Unifi Access, right? They get a working model, they get a product, they get a design. You got to admit their designs look gorgeous. They always look gorgeous, right? Everything they put out is aesthetically pleasing. So they put it out there and they let the market try it out. If it works, it works, and they sell a ton of it, and then they keep selling it. If it doesn't work, they depreciate the product. So really, it's just the consumers of the R&D department. And it reminds me of, I think it was Max Temkin, the guy who made Cards Against Humanity, talking about how they create a new game and sell it. So they basically Kickstarter everything they're going to do now. So they come up with an idea, they workshop it, they play around for a while, they develop it, they get a pretty refined product, and they put it up on Kickstarter. If people want it, great, they buy it. If not, they didn't waste that much money, So
this might work wonders for a board game, but it's very different for technology that you are deploying and want to have seriously maintained for years, specifically when it's controlling access to your building.
Well,
No, but I think
I'm not saying that's the model I would adopt. I just say it's kind of an interesting concept that they're working on.
Well, but that is a form of market research, and I think that's great. Why wouldn't Ubiquiti do something so? Well, I don't know. I have my things that I like about Ubiquiti and a couple things I don't like, where they are a corporate, publicly traded company. So they're going to do things to favor their stock over, what consumers might actually want. So whatever.
It also makes me just kind of the engineering maker person who wants to have stuff exist in the real world. I bet it's exciting to work in a Ubiquiti. If you're like an idea person or you've got that engineering mentality, I bet it is hella fun working in there. That you could come up with some idea. Hey, dudes, let's do some access control stuff. And then you work for a year, develop a product, and then you actually get it pumped out. I bet that's pretty cool.
Then you think about, like with the cameras, they were struggling with hardware problems because people were installing their Unifi video platform, and they were having trouble with beta features like there was like a time-lapse feature where you can kind of look at a piece together recordings for the whole schedule, and you could click and drag through it, but it was kind of buggy because of hardware. And now they're moving towards, you have to do it through a cloud key for the new Unifi video platform because they can control hardware and make sure that everything works as they intended. But how many of these services can you run on one of those boxes before it starts to become a problem? Because if you're doing, security, if you're doing layer 7 stuff, if you're doing camera control stuff, you're doing recording and rendering, like how much stuff can you actually load on one of these? Because most consumers are probably not going to buy multiple appliances and kind of split up responsibility. They're probably going to just turn on all the features.
And that's how Ubiquiti is selling it, right? It's a single box and a single solution that everything has in it.
Yeah, and I've talked to end users that have had problems with throughput because they had all of the features on. And it's like,
right, and if, for example, the new camera system, there's only a slot for like one drive until they do the new thing with the server. So that drive's getting used quite a bit to dump the recordings and stuff. So like, I would be concerned at some point customers are going to complain because stuff doesn't run as smooth because everything's turned on. It's getting to a point where it's kind of hard for them to get people to stay on their platform because now they can't build their own boxes with like refurbished servers to do video recording and get the latest greatest features. So I know the forums have been going crazy about this stuff.
Yeah, and you were talking about the standardization. Robert Pera started at Apple, right? So he was working at Apple while he was developing his first radio. So, and that's what Apple did with the iPhone, right? They made an ecosystem that they can entirely control. and theoretically, it's made it the most secure platform for mobile. I guess I hate calling them smartphones because the thing they do the worst is be a phone. The tiny computer in your pocket. But I don't know. Maybe there's something to that. Not to say that we haven't all gotten accustomed to the way we do things and how much we can save or optimize doing it ourselves. But I mean, I always try and see the logic in why they would do a thing, and maybe it's to combat that very thing that you're talking about, right? People doing it the wrong way. But then again, if they're doing it like I was recently, I've been looking at a lot of the Fortinet stuff, and when they do the unified threat management, so they'll do all these extra additional features, and every one of those features you turn on lowers the throughput. But they've got clearly delineated charts you can look up on all of their hardware platforms to see if you turn these features on, this is the throughput you can expect, right? And they're fairly accurate, real world. I think talking to Thrift that you probably actually can get a little bit more performance, but they're trying to be conservative. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember using that tool, and they kind of always pushed you into the higher model, the next higher model. But yeah, it's a great tool.
Oh yeah, they definitely want to sell hardware.
And you know what? They don't want the customer to buy something and then a few months later be like, this thing is already bogged down. So
that
I can't
that
blame
hurts your
them.
brand, right? Because people are, if people are using it the wrong way and you didn't explicitly tell them.
Error. Well, that's user error. I mean,
but
look, these are high-end products. You're not going to have the run-of-the-mill Joe come and buy this, or maybe that's what they want, which would be a problem. Like when Ubiquiti had their wireless cameras, the little golf ball cameras that were wireless. I think they still have them, right? Like people
They've got a
would
couple
put
new
them.
wireless ones.
Oh, okay. So people would put them on their Ubiquiti wireless network, and if you had too many wireless cams, obviously you saturated your Wi-Fi link. So, and it started to screw up.
All right. So I would also say if you're looking at I don't know, let's just throw something random out. The Wisp Talk group. Who are the loudest voices in there? Oftentimes,
Me.
oh no, I was just gonna say, oftentimes they can be the least informed, right? The people that are most readily ready to scream and rant and rave about something, and you're making my point so clearly here, Dave. No, it's just sometimes the people that are the most vocal are the ones that are the least informed on a product, right? So if you can't be as explicit as possible, it can hurt your reputation, right? So not everybody knows that guy who's screaming about this thing he didn't use it in the right way, right? They don't know that. They're not getting that background. The guy's just mad because it didn't work the way he wanted it to, so he's letting everybody know about it.
Yep, that's called a knee-jerk reaction, frustration.
For sure. I think it's out there. It's a real thing.
Yeah. I have a friend that bought a QNAP server for backups, and when he tried to actually, because it had a 10 gig connection, Ethernet connection, he thought, okay, it could do 10 gig, and he wasn't able to. And he was pretty pissed off when it wasn't able to, when it clearly states on QNAP's website what the maximum throughput of writing to their drives are. So, it's, look, I think the moral of the story is, do your research, be informed before you buy a product. I like the point Kernak made about how Ubiquiti does things. That was an eye-opener. Actually, it's nothing we didn't already know, but he said it really nice. Experiment. Sometimes it feels that way with certain vendors. And Fortinet's been fantastic as a UTM. I used to sell so much Fortinet before I got into VoIP, and I loved their product. One little thing I didn't like that they did was if you skip 1 year if you don't renew your subscription for all the services that they offer, okay, fine. But let's say on the second year you want to renew it, they will force you to pay the years that you have skipped. So I didn't like that. I don't know if they changed that policy, but I wasn't thrilled about that. But hey, it's the industry. You got to be informed,
For sure. All right. Let's I think Ubiquiti's black and blue at this point. Let's let him recover. Let's ring the bell. Get Mick over there. Give him some water. Let's see. Ken so I'm gonna transition over to some of the Slack stuff that I saw over the last couple of weeks. Ken was asking about VRRP, right? Virtual Router Redundancy Protocol. So it's kind of a first hop redundancy protocol. The idea being you can have one or multiple routers as your default gateway, and it will kind of seamlessly transition between all of them as there's issues between them. So one goes down, it magically kicks over the other, and you never see it. Anyway, he is running in a scenario where he's got VRRP on the inside facing his customers, right, or his clients or whatever it happens to be, and he's also running it on the outside for some specific reason. And he was talking about how when the inside or the outside, either one, transitions, he wants both of them to transition simultaneously, right? And that's an unfortunate thing with Mikrotik, is that there is no tracking. So like the big boys like Cisco, they have a tracking mechanism that you can associate with a lot of different things, one of them being VRRP, right? And so you can watch interfaces. If interfaces go down, it kind of decrements the priority associated with that. And if it decrements enough, well, preemption being turned on, it'll tell the other guy, hey, your priority's way higher, go ahead and take over, and it'll seamlessly transition. So it would fix these problems, right? And in Cisco, you can not just watch interfaces, but you can do SLA stuff, like you can ping hosts, or you can I think watch jitter or things like that, right? And so you can transition multiple VRRP groups simultaneously. It's really neat how that works. But in Mikrotik, there is no way. So one VRRP group doesn't just have a default mechanism to influence the other. And Tomas is probably going to unmute in a second and then correct me on all of this stuff. But I've run into this before where I was trying to think of a scenario where this would work, like cause problems, right? If you had two routers, two gateways right together, you could just cable them together, so that if you went into the VRRP group active on router 1 and then the WAN side was active on 2, it would just go across the wire, right, to the other. But say, for example, these are two geographically separated routers, two different areas, and it's not really feasible to run a wire between the two. I mean, I guess you could do a tunnel, right, in between, but then it's going to loop back on the inside and then cut over to the other one, and maybe it could overload the resources you have available on that link or something like that. I was trying to think of a way where you really had to try and influence the two of them together, and I guess scripting is the only way you could do that. And
they do have on master and on backup script options for VRRP interfaces, so you could script it.
Right. I use that in my data center, but why were you talking about geographically separate locations? Because VRRP is it's local only.
Right, but if you can tunnel to another router, you can run VRRP over those.
Yeah, I guess you could. What would that accomplish?
Well, say you're a WISP and you've got two internet drains at either end. I'm trying to work out a scenario that forces, right? Like just a hypothetical. Say it's something like that, and you're trying to get clients to pick one and then fail over the. I don't know. I mean, because you. But
it's just IP address. It's just a virtual IP that'll float between routers. So
I know I've run into scenarios before where I needed to do this, but I can't 100% remember what it was. That's the problem. So I've conquered this problem before. I just can't remember what the specific reason was.
I'll give you a very simple example where you need this. Let's say you just have two ISPs. And let's say this is just a company router that keeps a company alive. So from a customer side. And you have two ISPs for redundancy, and you want to have two routers on your side for redundancy as well. Which means now you need to do VRRP on each ISP's interface. So you have two VRRPs, and you have two interfaces, and you have two routers. And so now what you want to do is exactly that. If you fail over on one ISP, you want to fail over on the other ISP as well. And so it doesn't even need to be in a sense that you have, one outbound and one inbound, or, outside and inside interfaces that are running VRRP. It can even be any instance where you have multiple VRRPs running on multiple routers. You usually really want one router to be master on everything. You don't want like a split master domain when one router is a master for one interface and another router is a master for another interface, because that can cause a whole lot of issues. It can cause loops, layer 3 loops. It can cause many different things. And this is a pain on Mikrotik because you only have those on master and on backup scripts, and timing is a lot. And especially when you are with preemption on and you are falling back, And then you are suddenly, when you fall back with preemption, it executes a script on every single interface. Well, if that script does something, and then you can get into a scripting loop where your preemption does
Back
something and
and
your
forth.
script does something
Back
else.
and
And
forth.
exactly. So it's quite painful on Mikrotik, and you have to script it in a really strange way. Basically, you have the global variables on a Mikrotik, and you can use a global variable as a mutex, a lock, basically. So you have to, into your scripts, you have to implement locking that only one on-master or on-backup script can control the state at a time. So you have to implement a locking mechanism when each script on state change locks some global variable, and then other scripts just wait for that lock to become unlocked before they can change state as well. It's a mess. It can be done. It's fully doable, but you have to do it with the on-master and on-backup scripts, and you have to use locking, and it is a little bit painful.
So people that aren't familiar with Mikrotik scripting, what's the difference between a global variable and just a local variable?
So actually, there's a lot of confusion, even in general, about how Mikrotik variable scoping works, because this is all about variable scope. So a variable scope is what can see a variable. So if you are writing a script, and let's say you open an if block, and inside of an if block you define a variable. Well, as soon as that if block ends, the variable is not available for the rest of the script, right? That's the scope.
Mm-hmm.
So in Mikrotik, there are two basic scopes. There is the global scope, and then there is the script local scope. And within the script local scope, each code block has its own subscope. So basically, to make it simple, a script can only, at the most basic level, a script can only access variables inside of itself, unless it's a global variable, which can be accessed by any script running within that router OS.
Gotcha. So the idea of being a global one, it's always there, it's always alive, and multiple scripts can then reference that global variable, right?
And use it as a lock to make sure that multiple scripts aren't influencing the state at the same time, which can create all kinds of timing problems and race conditions and loops and many different other things.
Oh, the fun we have.
And if you actually go to like the system scripts menu and go to environment, you can see all the global variables. You know, a lot of people use it commonly for like, what's my public IP address in the WAN interface? Like, so that way, if you've got like dynamic DNS scripts or anything else that involves that, all the scripts can grab it, change it, or whatever.
One thing which I can really recommend, which is fun, it's a little bit more advanced Mikrotik scripting, but Mikrotik variables are not really variables because Mikrotik, of course, is not strongly typed, the scripting language in Mikrotik. So you can actually have a global variable can be a hash or an array, or it can be key value storage, which is really fun because you can make a single variable hold an array of hashes of key value stores, and you can make some really fun stuff with this, and it's really flexible. You can make just about anything in router OS, make it through script. But for example, we have one script where we do VOL, wake on LAN. And how you do VOL in Mikrotik is, of course, we do this for when people go, home from the office and they turn off their PCs, but then they needed access to their computer, so they VPN in and they just RDP to their computer, and it will automatically wake up and power on and turn on their computer through VOL, WOL, wake on LAN. And so basically they just dial the VPN, they remote desktop to their computer, and automatically it turns on. And how you can do this easily in Mikrotik is basically you create a firewall rule for RDP for a particular IP, and you count the number of packets on that rule. And as soon as there is a new packet, so as soon as the counter increases, you fire a VOL packet. We used to have a big mess in scripts, because we used to have a script per computer that would support VOL, and then we used to have a global variable per computer, etc. And after Mikrotik introduced hashes and arrays and all of that, which was about 2 or 3 years ago, basically now we have a single completely dynamic script that dynamically looks at all the VLL rules in the firewall, dynamically resolves that into a key value storage inside of a single variable. So if we remove a computer, there is, we don't have to remember, oh, we need to remove a script, we need to remove a firewall rule, we need to remove a global variable. None of that, everything is fully dynamic. So we can do some wonderful stuff with the Mikrotik scripting. It's just is a bit more advanced, and it takes, as with any coding or scripting, it takes time to learn the Mikrotik scripting language and the capabilities it has.
You know what I just learned through this conversation, Thomas, is that your definition of really fun stuff is very different than mine.
How is that not fun?
Goes back to the original thing about pleasure and pain, right?
Yeah. That's like when I go to my wife's cycle classes. She says, God, we're going to have so much fun. Aren't you guys having fun? And I can't even talk. I'm so miserable. I'm like, no, this is... Obviously, you're a sadist. I see that now.
So you are solving the issue of the customers. Well, in this case, being, your employees,
Yeah.
right? But you are solving the issues for your users. You are learning cool new technology, and you are utilizing cool technology. And magically, computers just turn on around the office. Isn't that cool? Isn't that fun?
Solving an engineering problem. It's a puzzle. Solve the puzzle conveniently with Mikrotik, and
That's pretty awesome for sure. All right, so let me move on to the next one. It's another Mikrotik one. Jim Jones was talking about for some specific scenario, he needed a light web proxy, and he was thinking that the Mikrotik, it has a built-in web proxy, and did people think it would work for his use case? Immediately, people were like, hey, if you're going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff, you need to blah, 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 or if you're trying to cache, it's probably blah, blah, blah. I thought of a scenario where I've actually done this before with a Mikrotik is I was working with a research company, and they had a connection into a university. And so generally universities have this special access to these huge online databases of research from all these other researchers all across the globe or whatever. And they're these big, expensive subscription services that you have to pay for. Well, this research company through the university, they had an internet connection at a place, so they put a web proxy out there, and their scientists, whenever they needed to do some of the specialized research to get access to some of these documents, they would just redirect their browser through this web proxy, which would get them onto campus and get access to those resources. Right? So I can see some definite use cases for this. It worked really well for me. It set up in about 5 minutes, and it ran for, as far as I know, it's still running. I don't think anybody's had any problems with it. Have you guys ever actually utilized the web proxy feature in a Mikrotik? I know it's not just for people having their router compromised and then web proxy turned on. It actually has functional uses.
So we used to actually use the web proxy a lot, like 10 years ago, for actual caching. Back in the day when our schools here in Slovakia had, one Mac DSL, and that was it, and you had 500 students trying to use that,
Nice.
right? That would be bad. Or even just antivirus updating on 500 computers would kill the internet, right? So you could have easily cached that before the HTTPS era, of course. So these days for that, for traffic caching or anything, proxy is not really useful. And I haven't used a proxy since.
now, especially just recently, it's a lot easier to do encrypted DNS now. I think Chrome browsers already do this through Chrome's DNS, and then in Firefox you can turn something on so all your DNS requests are encrypted. So the days of proxying stuff are kind of going to be difficult, even with the big appliances now. So now all your DNS is encrypted, and all the traffic's encrypted through HTTPS. So it depends. I guess it depends what you want to do. Accessing remote files is a pretty cool use case, but it's almost.
Going back to security, right? If you are doing proxy, then if you are doing HTTP proxy, that's a really bad idea, right? If you are doing HTTPS proxy, it means you are really doing SOX proxy at that point, because HTTPS proxying is just SOX proxy. Unless you are doing the whole man in the middle replacing certificate and all of that, which is a little bit different again from everything else that we discussed previously. We do have quite I do have quite a few clients which run more secure environments which require proxying any outbound internet connectivity, right? So you mostly today use it in really secure environments to basically you completely disallow internet, right? Or TCP destination AT and TCP destination for free, just block it. But then you still want your servers to be able to update. You still want, all the services that require worldwide outbound connectivity to work. So you just force that through a proxy. So these days, I think that's one really common use case where you don't use it for, caching or anything else. You just use it as a mechanism to control traffic flow in really secure environments. Although doesn't really help much, because there was a really nice talk which I think it was linked in our Slack as well, like a couple of months ago. It was from one of the security conferences, and basically these days you can transmit a malicious payload through just about anything. I mean, DNS has so in this particular talk it was about DNS TXT records. A DNS TXT record can contain any text. So technically, you can put a malicious payload into a DNS TXT record, and you split it across multiple DNS requests, and you can get 100 lines of codes in 5 DNS requests. And suddenly DNS becomes a malicious code payload delivery method, right? So it's there is so many ways to deliver malicious payloads that, specifically denying HTTP traffic, does it really solve anything at this point?
Doesn't ICMP generally use just the straight alphabet, but you could change it to be anything?
Yeah. So ICMP sequence numbers, you can influence those. There is many ways. I mean, of course, always security is about layers, right? How do if there is a super simple way and I can block it and it makes, 50% of exploits or, attack vectors not possible anymore, then yes, of course, I'm going to do it. That just makes sense, right? But it doesn't really mean that it's protecting you from everything.
For sure. All right, let's switch gears over to Michael Rhone. He was asking for some opinions on, if it's a small network and you want to just, do administration inside that, or I guess, to just run inside the network too. Why run IPv6 inside of a small network? And so, of course, right out of the box, Nick says, why would you not? Because he's a big proponent of IPv6. We all know that. But I think it was really just a kind of, what would be your rationale? And the first thing that popped into my mind was, if I have a small network, I know IPv6 is an inevitability, right? I'm going to eventually have to start utilizing it. It'd probably be easier for me to start doing that now in this small environment where I can kind of get my hands around it a little bit better before things grow, or really before, because it seems like, especially with new technologies, it can be daunting to roll them out across a large environment. And also, if I put it off, then whenever it comes time where I have to do it, it's going to be some kind of emergency situation. I won't be able to do it at my leisure, sort of thing. So that was my thinking. I was just curious what you guys thought about, because there were some people in there that they basically said for administration of the internal network, they tell all of their customers just to do it with IPv4. Don't even, if it's a router that they want to access an SNMP poll, don't even put IPv6 on there to administer it. Just go IPv4. So I thought that was interesting, sort of juxtaposition.
I think that's how it started. It was about, is it worth overlaying IPv6 for network management? Is where it started. And then, I don't remember who it was, but the general consensus was what's the point? You might as well use the IPv6 and deliver it to the customer. But as far as management goes, what's the point? And then Nick basically said, it should all be IPv6 and you should use DNS to manage actually getting to equipment. And that was what started the whole thing, the back and forth of whether it's worth actually deploying it across the management network.
So I'll give you a very simple reason why. Monitoring. If you are running a dual stack environment, you need to monitor each stack. And if you don't have, IP addresses for that stack because you can easily, transit traffic through link local. It's what OSPF does, right? OSPF, each hop transits through link local. But if your monitoring solution doesn't have full reachability over the protocol, basically root cause analysis will become super complicated because now you don't know at which hop, things break. You don't even. It just makes everything much easier if you fully monitor each stack and you have to troubleshoot IPv6 when IPv6 is actually deployed through the stack.
Right. And what you're talking about too is link local isn't internet routable, right? It's not globally unique.
It's not unique anywhere, even within your local network.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's just
So
local for the
if you're
link.
trying to do a trace route and you're just going over link local, you'll just get stars for that link, right?
So it just, if you are going to deploy IPv6, you should deploy it to the infrastructure as well, to have the visibility, to have the monitoring, to have the data, to have, just the ease of use for yourself. I mean, realistically, you are not saving IP addresses because IPv6, address exhaustion is not an issue. All of us will be dead long before that happens. So I think for me, yeah, as well. Like, for example, our internal infrastructure is fully IPv6 enabled. We don't deliver IPv6 to the customers yet because we don't have IPv6 transit from our upstream providers yet. Welcome to Slovakia. But all our infrastructure is fully IPv6 enabled, routable, and all of that. And
But
it is good.
Isn't that a
practice.
whole nother protocol stack I have to secure on my device?
Well, yeah, it is another stack you have to secure, you have to maintain, you have to, it is another stack, but you have to do it sooner or later. And I guess coming back to the question, why should you do it? I can give you a super simple reason, which I think David will attest to, SIP. If you can get around NAT and you don't have to do NAT, which in IPv6 doesn't exist, it makes SIP so much easier and so much better.
Or you could just use ALG and problem solved.
Yeah, but realistically, how many times have you had to debug ALG? For me, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
like ALG
Actually, it just happened
stacks.
recently. Who were we doing that with, Nick? Where we said, no, that was for a customer of mine, LALO Cab. Their ALG was not doing what it was supposed to do.
Yeah,
So they had to use a session board controller anyway.
They
Yeah,
were
you
also
forgot-
on an old x86 appliance on like a
Yeah.
really old version of Router OS 4, like early 5.
Yeah.
And
So it's
it's
probably
not just
changed.
about router OS. Let's say you deliver SIP to your actual end customers and you don't control their routers, right? Who knows what the ALG
Well, here's-
implementation on that router does, right?
But here's
yeah.
the flip side of that. Not every carrier will support IPv6. So if the audio is coming from a carrier that doesn't support IPv6, you're getting nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated discussion, of course.
It's not. I don't think it's that complicated. It's just if they don't support it, you're not getting it. But yes, you are right. It will get around the NAT problem. I don't think that's a big enough justification to use IPv6. But at the same point, you're right. We will have to use it sooner or later. Might as well get used to it. We're network engineers, so it's something that we're going to have to toil with, and we'll do the Ubiquiti method. Test it out with the customer first.
It's so funny. I kind of feel like we're all surgeons in the 1850s, and we're talking about, what are you talking about? We shouldn't use leeches, or we shouldn't bleed our patients. How else are we going to get the demons out of them? You know what I mean? It's like, it's obviously it's something we need to transition from, but it's going to take us a little while to let it go. I get it.
But there are real world benefits, right? I mean, okay, so let's say SIP is, yeah, sure, it works better. Let's say it's not a good enough justification for you. Another big one, which is any gamers today want IPv6. For any console needs IPv6 to work with any peer-to-peer games, right? Any peer-to-peer games, even on PC, with IPv6, they just work out of the box. And this might be not a motivator for a network engineer, but it is a serious motivator for a large part of your customer base.
Yeah.
Not having to use NAT definitely clears up a lot of issues. I mean, aside from ALG, it just clears up a ton of issues for applications that aren't NAT aware. But
Well,
yeah, what the hell? I guess we'll start using
well,
it.
I mean too, like Xboxes, like with the new Xbox implementation. There, what is it? The stupid IPNAT helper thing.
UPnP.
Jeez, thank you, Christ, that fell right out of my head. Yeah, it's. I mean, it's a known issue that it's broken, and it just there is no fix in sight.
It's not just broken, right? With UPnP, it's a really blunt weapon because you compromise security. Why? Because you don't have direct control. Anything can open a port, and if you allow basically unsolicited port opening, you have to also allow those ports to go through security. Whereas with IPv6, that's a little bit different, right? Because it's not unknown, the traffic that will be there on IPv6. Whereas with UPnP, you don't know. Whoever can request whatever port to be open to whatever destination, and the firewall has to accommodate that, otherwise communication would not work. So UPnP is quite dangerous.
For sure.
About the gaming thing, Nick, didn't you say that, like, I'm not a gamer, but I know Nick knows a little thing or two about gaming. So you said that, like, if you're double natted, which some ISPs will do, like CGNet or something.
It depends. Even if it depends on the console and the service, because some of them, especially WISPs, they can't afford to buy public IPs. Because I think now a /24 is at least 5,000 for a block to start at auction. So there becomes a problem where you have to try to DMZ the game console, or because as soon as you go through that NAT, you can't access online services, you can't access voice chat, and customers aren't going to understand like what the problem is. So you kind of have to get IPv6 addresses. They're pretty easy to get, and that just kind of solves the problem without you having to shell out the money to get a whole block of IP addresses to accommodate everybody, and you can use CGNet and then let IPv6 take care of the game consoles. But I mean, more and more customers are just going to switch providers because they can't play online, and that's a lot of what some of the customers want to use their internet for, other than streaming. So you have to do something.
I think once you take a look at everything, maybe one point doesn't apply to you or the other point doesn't apply to you. But if you look at the whole of everything, all the benefits together that IPv6 will bring to you, it just makes sense to do it rather than not to do it, because there is monetary reasons, there is customer satisfaction reasons, there is technical reasons, there is, where you put everything together, I think it really just, it just should be done, and that's it.
Yeah, you just start adding it all up.
Just quick question. I remember, Nick, you did say that if, not all websites are IPv6, don't have any IPv6 addresses, so web hosting companies don't offer it to not everybody. So in that case, if you're strictly only on IPv6, you wouldn't be able to visit that website.
Well, that was the point. Like you should dual stack, but you can't go exclusively IPv6.
Okay.
It's just not realistic right now. But I think part of how the question started was, if you're doing an MPLS network and you tunnel back to an access concentrator, for some people, you can just hand out using like Radius, you can just start handing out V6 at your access concentrator. And I think it was to the point where they're asking about how you handle it across like just the management section of it. But I think everyone should deploy IPv6 if they have it. And I applied for it before part of the WISP got sold, and it took like 2 business days, and we had a whole block and it was ready to use. So it's not hard to get it, but I don't know. A lot of people are waiting for something. I'm not sure. But it's easy to get a hold of compared to IPv4 addresses.
For sure. Yeah, they are more than happy to hand them out to you.
God, at least you can remember an IPv4 address. Holy shit. Imagine
DNS.
Trying to get to a DNS. That's
what Nick was saying. You just use DNS.
Which
you plan it, you engineer it the first time, and then use DNS to log into stuff.
And I look forward to moving everything to DNS. Being forced to move everything to DNS. So this reliance on memorization or spreadsheets of IP, just have DNS names and be done with it. Call it a day.
But let me ask you this: with an IPv6 DNS server, you'd have to remember the entire IPv6 address, right?
What? Because that would just be on your infrastructure handing it out. So
okay,
wherever you're connecting,
Also,
you just This is
you
a
can
DNS
just
server. Here's a
you
DNS.
can just look it up as well. Just make it an easy to remember and just do like dig your.dns.net at 8888 or whatever, or and there you go.
Yeah. DNS1 or DNS1.gregshall.com. DNS2 or something like that. Let's shift gears completely. So I had somebody, and this is more one of those thought sort of things, which some people love, some people hate. I'm one of those people that love them. So suck it. It's here at the end. It's taking on custom projects from people, right? So this is going to be, I think probably everybody's done a little of this at some point. Nick, I'm looking at you. Thomas, I'm talking to you. Whenever you're talking to somebody about taking on a custom project, at some point on some of these projects, there's going to be some signs that you're in danger. And I think also at some point you also have to know when to say no. And I think maybe even more importantly is to know how to say no in the right way. And I just wanted to kind of, before I went on a diatribe about it, I was just curious to see what your thoughts were on danger signs, when and how to say no to people.
For me personally, I think I have a bunch of rules, and I think it's fairly simple. So first of all, do I even have time? That's the first thing, which, by the way, I will take this time to apologize to everybody that has sent an email to me, and I have said no in the last year, because I have said no to just about everybody in the last year that wanted something from me. So, do I have time? Can I make it happen? Then if I can make it happen, then does the customer know what they want? That's my second question. Oftentimes you will get customers that will just ask for things which are unrealistic, or super hard, or even technically not feasible. And I personally, if I do take a project, I make sure that the customer is technical enough that they know enough to understand what is happening, what is not happening, and if something doesn't happen, or if there is trouble, they can understand why. For me, that's important, because I find it makes communication with the customer so much easier when they don't have to be an expert in the subject area, right? They just have to have technical background to understand if you explain to them there's a problem, and this is why, and this is why it will cost more or take more time, or they can understand that. And so for me, it's about time, it's about the customer, and setting the customer expectations right, and making sure that that they at least have a little bit of knowledge in the area. And that's it in like 3 sentences.
Solid. Do you wanna weigh in, Nick?
Yeah, this is kind of something that I'm still learning about, because I haven't been freelancing a bunch of stuff for too long, but I think it is really important to have an initial conversation and really get a true scope about the project, because depending on the customer, a lot of times when people reach out for a consultant, they've kind of come to terms that they can't really do it themselves in-house, that they want to get it done. But I hear a lot of, I heard I could do this way, so I want to pay you to do it. But sometimes they don't realize what's actually involved with that process, or how feasible it is. So I think it's really important to really understand the full scope of what's happening. And if you don't have, I guess, time management down pretty well, it's really easy to take on a project that is pretty time overwhelming, that may not have seen that way in the first place. So I think it's very important to get a clear scope of work, because it's not fair to the customer if you try to take on a job that's ends up being over your head, and it also kind of wastes their time, and it kind of negatively impacts the way that a future relationship could happen with that customer. But there is a lot of they don't really understand what's happening, or also if you do a job really quick, it's easy for them to think other things are that quick. So it's kind of something you have to kind of feel out. And for me, there's a lot of different tasks that I haven't done repetitively enough, that I don't have good time frames and how long it usually takes. So I think most of the people that I kind of work with, it's kind of a relationship thing, where I try to be as clear as I can about timeframes for projects and what's actually involved and what's happening and why it might take some time. I think communication is pretty important when it comes to that. And through the communication process and kind of laying out the scope ahead of time is a pretty easy way to kind of identify the other person's temperament and what their expectations are going to be. And I think there's a lot of things red flag wise that you're just going to kind of tell by the way that how pushy they are, the way that if they're actually listening to what you're saying rather than just wanting to throw money at you and get it done in one day. So but like I said, I'm still trying to figure that out with certain projects. So it's not easy.
Yeah, and everybody's different.
From my perspective.
You know, every person
Right.
you're potentially talking to. I think you guys hit most of it on the head for me there is, so my recent experience was I was talking to this guy and he asked something that was just so strange. He asked, could I help them configure a server so that it would boot with the hard drive over an Ethernet cable? That's how he said it. And so I scratched my head for a while and thought of some stuff, and then I was thinking he was physically meaning to, like, the SATA cable would be an Ethernet cable because right, and I went through all these iterations. And so that's when the red flag started going off, was that I had to go back and forth over such a basic fundamental thing. You know, it's like a hard drive lives in the server, you know, and just that his understanding didn't seem to be there. He had been in the, as he told me, in the IT field for 40 years. But, you know, so what I did was I wrote up a scoping document for once I thought I knew what he wanted. I even made diagrams, right? Because I think in pictures, right? So I like to come at a problem from multiple angles, right? Because not everybody absorbs information the same way, right? Some people are more auditory, some are more visual, some are, you know, so I did that and I sat down with this joker. And I was talking to him, and yeah, what he was asking wasn't technically viable, the thing he was doing. And he was trying to ask me to do something that I didn't feel would be successful. And during the course of this conversation, he actually started getting combative with me, you know, and because it wasn't going to work. And he was telling me how network guys always say this kind of stuff. I was like, and I was like, dude. And so I realized, you know, during the course of this that I needed to say no to him, but I had to say it in the right way, right? So that he can save face, right, for one, because you don't want anybody to feel dumb or inadequate or anything like that, but also so that we could save face. And so I basically said, you know, given all the information and given what you're asked for, I don't think I possess the required skills to make this project successful. You know, it's like I don't, and that's where I'm at, you know, and so I can't in good conscience take on this project because I don't think it's going to work the way you want it to. And I fully think that it is possible in some way. I'm just not capable of doing that with my skill set, right? So I feel like that gave the guy an out, but it also was very transparent and somewhat self-deprecating, you know, and his attitude entirely shifted right after that second. But he also then said, I'm okay with it not working. You know, I just want blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that might be okay for you, right? Because he's trying to develop a product or whatever. And I get that. And, you know, sometimes it doesn't work, but it's like, that might be all right for you, but it's not all right for me, you know, in this whole sort of journey. So I was just trying to, you know, set clear expectations of, for me, a successful project looks like this, and what you're asking for, I get that you think in your head it's going to, because he was still operating in the assumption that he knew better about this thing than I did, and maybe he does, but it's like, I feel like if you possessed enough information to make this adequately work the way you're saying it, you wouldn't be asking me for help. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? To you guys? It's like, if you possessed the intelligence on the subject matter, you wouldn't need me, because it was so weird and complex and just not technically viable that it was, but you know, you've got this guy sitting in front of you, so how do you let him down? And I was just, to me, in my head, the easiest way was to say that I'm too stupid, which is completely honest, because I couldn't figure out a way to make this thing work. It just didn't make any sense to me. So I think it's so hard, especially, say it's a lean time and you want the cash, or it would make a big difference to you. It's how do you draw that line? And it's got to be tough for some folks, if you're in a scrape. But for me, it was just maintaining reputation. I don't ever want to be known as the guy that half-asses something or can't get it all the way done.
Right.
If I do find myself in that position, I'll be like, man, we're in over my head. I need to call in help. Can we get this guy or that guy? As bad as that
So I guess
feels sometimes.
I hear stuff like that a lot, and it's like when somebody starts talking in like pseudocode, and they take a problem and they talk about it like it's so simple, and they just need to pay you to do it, and they already know how it's going to work. Those are usually types of situations that I try to back out of, because it seems like you're getting set up. It's like, well, if you already know the end solution and it's simple, like, why are you paying me? And if you can't kind of explain the intermediary steps or some detail about it, like if it's all just pseudocode and there's too many questions and they're not willing to like work through the problem, they just want it done, like it's probably not a good idea to take on that work. There are a lot of good people that I have relationships with. They're like, I want to get this to this point here. I'm not really sure what steps I need to take, but I'd like to talk about it. And I think those are more healthy, because it's easier to kind of break the work apart into like milestones, rather than the person wants the end product now, but they don't know how to achieve the end product, and most of what they're saying doesn't make sense. So it's kind of a struggle to try to like pry the information out of them. So if it's a struggle that way, and if they're getting aggressive, like that guy seemed to be, I mean, it's probably not something that you want to work in that sense. And if they're willing to get that angry about implementation details or just getting it started, like what happens once you get through the project a little bit and you've had your hands in it and there's problems with it that you suggested, they're still going to try to keep coming back to you to fix these problems you told them that were going to come up, and it's not productive, and it's pretty stressful.
Yeah, I mean, you find yourself in a tough position, because I've sort of been in those areas before, where it also can turn into this monster, not necessarily in reality, but in your head, and it becomes this thing that you're just afraid of. And
right.
For me, that can turn into procrastination, and I'll put it off, and I'll find everything else I need to be doing other than that, and it just builds into this huge beast. And that's not healthy, because then it just kind of sits in there and festers, and man, I hate finding myself in those situations. It's really tough, and I think, as Thomas will attest, dark mode in Unimus, that was a really simple idea, right? Just make it dark mode, right, Thomas? But it took a couple minutes, right?
We knew it wasn't simple, right?
No, it's just
Mike thought
it's
it
just
was
dark
simple.
mode, Thomas. That's simple. Come on.
Yeah. Well, we scoped it out, and we knew what we were getting into, and we originally said no, but our developer just decided that it was too cool not to do, and so he did it over the weekends, and then we just said, okay, well, you already have like half of it done, so just finish it, and now everybody's happy with it. So that turned out to be a happy, well, something that should not have been done, right? but still, yeah.
But I mean, think about it. The idea is only 2 words: dark mode.
Right. Pseudocode.
Yeah.
Right.
But the implementation is so much deeper, right? It's it's like the iceberg floating in the ocean, right? It's a little bit poking up, but it's just huge on the back end. So.
Oh, it's huge, and it's not just code. That testing that comes with it, user validation, graphical work. There's a ton of it. And if anybody ever wants to hear like the full story why just make a dark mode is not as simple as that, we can save that for another day. But yeah, simple things or things that might seem simple oftentimes are, and oftentimes are not, right? It just depends on proper scoping and proper validation and proper estimation, and all of that is required to know how much stuff equals time equals money things are going to take.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you're talking about scoping, that can be hard too, right? So, you give somebody a scope and they're a really good guy, they're a really good customer, there's good communication, and then they just ask for a little bit more and a little bit more. It's like, how do you draw that line? When do you draw that line?
Oh yeah, feature creep and scope creep is real.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough, especially when like your businesses are relationship based, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to damage this, or I don't want them to be upset with me, and the monster in your head can be your worst enemy when it comes to that stuff.
I think you find that when people don't value who you are. If somebody doesn't value who you are, then they don't care about the relationship. Then they're just like, I need this done, get it done.
Right.
It's a really tough line, though, because when you have somebody really technical who knows what they are talking about, sometimes they think that, I want them this, and just do it for me. Sometimes that can work because of a simple reason. They might know how to do it, but they don't have time to do it. It's just spotting that difference of, somebody that actually knows what they're talking about and, they just want to buy your time and they want something done to spec and they can give you a good enough spec. That can be a really satisfying and easy project.
Absolutely.
But finding that as opposed to somebody who just wants to micromanage and doesn't have an idea is really hard.
I think the scenario where people just want you to get it done no matter what, no matter how irate. Usually you'd find that with, I think, if with employees. If you have, if anybody's been an employee that has a really unrealistic boss, you'd say, I need this done right away, or I need this done by tomorrow, and it's just not possible. I mean, what are you going to say in that case? You're going to say, sorry, this is outside my skill set? I mean, that could have other consequences that you might not want. But, yeah.
Yeah, being an employee, things can get much more complex really fast than being a contractor, definitely.
Yeah, because you got to worry about politics. But,
oh yes.
Yeah. What boggles my mind is that, once you find yourself in one of those situations, you learn how not to do that to other people, or you tend to, I think. And yet you'll end up with a boss who is completely oblivious to those sorts of things. And it's like, you're older than me, so I know you've been around the block. I know you've had to have run into this stuff. How is this still invisible to you? And it's like, how are you not growing as a human being and making yourself better? Or sometimes it's like, how did you get in a position of power? Were you just the only guy that didn't quit for 10 years? And,
Well, there is the concept, it's a real corporate concept, fail upwards, right? You promote the guy who you want to do the least damage to your working team, right? So they fail upwards.
Or the one I've found true in I'm not going to say a lot, but in some scenarios, that's probably how I ended up where I got, is you get promoted into incompetence. So you get promoted until you're too incompetent to go any higher. But and it's also like you're incapable of fully doing everything you should be able to, because if you knew enough about what you were trying to do, you wouldn't be incompetent, thereby undoing the thing. So you basically get promoted until you're just not really able to go any higher. So I definitely feel like I've gotten there with my mental capacity, at least. But
it just also depends on your skill set, right? When you get promoted, at some point, the only way upwards is management.
Yeah.
And not everybody wants to do that, and not everybody is meant for management. Yeah. So it's not that I think it's a wrong way to look at it, that, I can't go any higher, this is a problem or something like that. I don't think that's the right way. It's if you've reached, the peak of what you want to do, rather than, you maybe still could go higher, but you will have to switch into management or switch into something else and you really don't want to. I don't really feel that's a problem, right? It's just, a different way to approach it, because if you need to change your skill set and you need to do something you really, you've never done before, or you wouldn't enjoy, then, is this really a promotion? Are you actually, continuing upwards, or are you just completely switching career paths, which is a very different thing.
And you know what, too, I think is interesting that I've seen in some technical organizations and in technical people, as well is that, as they start needing to transition into that management mindset, to actually lead people and do all those things, there's no technical training associated with being a manager. Like, they don't do management training. There's no, hey, go out and seek this thing, or hey, you should read a book, or it's like they think they should magically be able to do it. And I don't know about you, but I've met a lot of technical folks that are great at being technical folks, but they're not good at managing people per se, or being people persons. You know what I mean? It's like sometimes that's why people go into the technical fields, because they don't want to have to talk to people a whole lot. So I think it's unfortunate that we will train ourselves to work on this router. We'll go to classes, we'll do things like that, but then when it comes to managing people or trying to understand your employees and things like that, you're expected to just intuitively understand that. It's like, the idea of like having a kid and then you're supposed to magically know how to raise this tiny human. It's kind of crazy. It's crazy to think they let me raise a human being, for one.
Well, I think it's completely okay to not have that training, as long as you don't want to go into that field, right? As long as, if you, like, hypothetically, if you get a promotion and they say, you need to be a manager, then you should, have enough self-reflection to know, I can't do that, or I don't want to do that, even if it brings me a higher paycheck. If I know that I can't do something, or I'm not trained enough in something, then, or I don't want to do it because I don't enjoy it, then I shouldn't do it. And it's, of course, never that simple, right? Because if it brings you 30,000 more a year, then that's a whole different discussion and a whole different motivator. But it's I think you should at least be able to say, okay, well, this depends, of course, at where you work, and it's again for politics, right? But maybe if you can, then tell them, I need a month or two, I need to go and read some books, I need to go and attend some trainings, I need to figure out if this is what I really want to do, and if I figure out that I want to do it, then I know I'm not currently yet fully capable of doing it, so I need to learn more and I need to transition more into that role. So it just depends, if you are that guy who just likes to sit in a data center wearing his jacket and configure routers all day, I don't think there is anything wrong with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
But I think there's also some fear that factors in there too, right? So your company comes to you and they offer you this promotion, but you have to manage people. There's this fear that I can't tell them that I'm incapable of doing this, right? Because, well, maybe they'll just find somebody who is, or, you know what I mean? It's, again, your company wants you to be successful. I don't care who you are and what you're doing. They want you to be successful, but in your head, it doesn't always work out that way, right? You're just afraid. What happens if I say no to this because I'm incapable, and even if I explain it, maybe this opportunity will never come back. Maybe they'll get another. Maybe the last guy was in this job for 15 years, and so I know this next guy is going to be there for. You know what I mean? It's just.
I think we're all assuming that this is the perfect world, where everybody wants you to do good and everybody wants to see you move up. Like Kernak said, sometimes what will happen is you'll fail up just to get somebody out of the department that they don't want in the department. So, that's the reality. That kind of stuff does happen. If a company's trying to get rid of you, there are certain ways to get rid of an employee that they don't want there, where it's not a liability to the company, where the company wouldn't have to pay unemployment fees or anything like that. So one technique is, fail them up. So let that be someone else's problem. Put them outside of your department in someone else's department where they'll fall flat on their face, and it's that guy's problem.
Yeah. And I've heard about that in the university world as well, where they'll just get transferred, right? Completely out of control. There's, all right, now you're over here, basically sitting behind a desk.
Sometimes they'll transfer you. I know someone that they said, okay, we're opening a new office in Alaska, and we want you to work there. And he's like, well, I can't go to Alaska. He's like, well, there's no room here for you. So that is the clever prick way to fire someone, where the person has to quit. So whatever, weird stuff like that.
It probably a lot depends on the relationship between the employer and the employee. Right? It's very different working. It depends, right? Probably it's very different working for a soulless corporation than working for a local 10-man job, right? Or 10-man shop, right? And I'm not saying that automatically working in a small local company will be good, but the chances are it will be much better than in a corporation. So yeah, in a perfect world, everybody would have a good job and they would be happy in the environment they work with, and the employer would care for the employee, and the employee would care for the employer, and everybody, rainbows and butterflies and unicorns.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Tom don't have a simple solution to this one. Tom has a simple solution to everything. It's very simple.
People are difficult.
Yeah, I know.
Hardware and engineering has tried and true ways of doing things. People, though, I don't know.
That's the human factor. It's unpredictable.
That's what they say. The world would be a great place if it wasn't for all the people in it.
It's one of my favorite sayings.
I've encountered quite a few potential consulting type work or software, or like someone that wants to replace their CRM or something. And the other thing I kind of look for is, I've noticed there's quite a few smaller companies that need to fill a chair, and a lot of times their IT person is the person that has the most IT experience in the building, but they actually don't really have IT experience. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed that a lot of these people, when you talk with the company owner and them, like in a conference, the conversation is so much different, because it's kind of the things that we were talking about. It's like they get put in that position, or they get offered the position, and they kind of try to fake it till they make it. So when you're talking to them in front of the owner, it's like they're trying to run the show, and then I have a conversation with them after one-on-one. It's like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I need help. And those things have kind of bit me before, because I've actually had their IT person badmouth me to the owner, even though I did all of the work, met the deadlines, and they took credit for it. And it caused a bad relationship. Yeah. So now I'm trying to be a little more transparent with the owner, make sure that they understand how the progress is going, what exactly I'm doing, and communicate more kind of with them, with the IT person, because I don't really understand that. But I guess if you're put into that position and you feel like you need to be the IT guy and you need to have all the answers, and you're going to make stuff up or whatever.
Well, I've seen it before too, where an IT guy will make a misconfiguration, or they'll botch a firewall upgrade or something like that. And, the vendor is this, they're a removed third party that makes a convenient scapegoat. You know what I mean? It helps them save face. And it's unfortunate in those situations sometimes, because everybody will get carbon copied, right? Everybody and their dog is just on this email, and they're like back and forth, and everything's really heated. And then you peel back the layers and you help them figure out where they messed up. And then all of a sudden the email is just to you. Everybody gets dropped off the carbon copy list. And in those scenarios, you think to yourself, all right, what do I do here? Do I reply straight to this guy, knowing that odds are I'm going to get thrown under the bus? Or do I add everybody back into the CC list and just be very transparent and say, I'm glad we were able to help you figure this out, let us know if there's anything else next time, so it's tricky, right?
Better safe than sorry, I guess, to pull everybody back in. Usually
it is. But yeah, it's happened to us more than once before. So
are you do like one time I deployed a bunch of tunnels for somebody, and they happened to go in and not know what they were doing and use the quickset Mikrotik. Took site offline. And it was a remote site too. Yeah,
I remember that.
And I try to be very clear, like, don't do that. If you have any questions, let me know. And then the site's offline, I can't get into it. It's like,
and by the way,
no, I didn't. And then 30 minutes later, well, yeah, I did use quickset.
By the way, the second time it happened, he was too embarrassed to call you, so he called me, and I'm like, did you use quickset? And he's like, yeah, I think I did. I'm like, oh, man. He's like, yeah, Nick told me not to use that, but...
That's kind of a personality thing that I look for, too. Like, if they want to have a conversation and be like, hey, I screwed up, can you help me? No problem. But if it's like, I'm not going to admit I did something, so I have to spend the time to troubleshoot, like, what could have happened. Yeah, when it turns out they did quickset, and it's like the IP address in the WAN interface, or the default route or something like that is the reason for connectivity problems. So it's like, I'm trying to get more people that I can have a relationship with and a conversation with where, it's not unhealthy,
sure.
I guess.
Well, this to that person's detriment because now they're wasting time. And honestly, if you're getting paid hourly, they're wasting money. Just be transparent. Say, I did these things. Do you think this had anything to do with it? And move on with your life. Saved everybody time.
Yeah, let's fix it.
Yeah.
Now that guy is cool. He didn't realize changing one setting in QuickSet will change everything else that's on that page. So
it really quickly sets.
Yeah, but look, if it wasn't guys like that, need guys like us, right? So
Yeah, Tomas has
he's
a
cool
very
when he makes it.
non-PG name for QuickSet that's pretty cute.
Well, I mean, at this point it's a little bit better, and yeah, for those of you who haven't heard it yet, it's not called QuickSet, it's called QuickFuck. And but so it used to be that you just switch modes in QuickSet. When you click QuickSet and you don't click apply, you don't click anything, and you change modes from like CPE to router to bridge, it would wipe your config and reconfigure the router. Mikrotik have luckily changed that, so there is now a confirmation box when you change those modes that will tell you, this will actually reconfigure your router. But about a year ago, you could have just gone to QuickSet and, I just want to see what's on this other tab if I change from CPU to router, and your router would be done. And that's why I called it QuickFuck. So now it's a little bit better. But yes,
there should be a way to just get rid of that altogether. Like maybe have it in packages, even though it's not a package, and just disable it so it would never show up again. That would be nice.
I mean, I think part of why I like Mikrotik so much is for most things, they don't force you to do it a certain way. It's a tool. So, for the average end user that wants to get up and running real quick, the default config's good. If they want to change the modes, like if it's going to be for like the access point or whatever they're trying to do, it's a quick way to get started. But I think the people that are using the tool should probably kind of figure out what they're trying to do and play with it instead of like blaming the hardware. Because I like that you have all of the options available and you don't have to do things one way. There's a million ways to do it in Mikrotik.
Yeah.
Rather than you click this one button in a software controller and it does all the stuff for you and you don't have to worry about it. But I guess that's what a lot of people want now.
That's the catch-22. Do you want to make it easy that everybody could use, or do you want to make it like making your own painting your own painting? Everybody's got a different style of doing it.
I don't know. I think there's a...
And why is this IP subtunnel doesn't work? My Meraki's one click. It's but
exactly.
How much are you paying for your system?
Yeah. I think there's sometimes a compromise. Like used to in ASDM, like if you're configuring a Cisco ASA firewall, there's a checkbox where you could say, go through the GUI, you do all the things, and when you get ready to apply a change, it would just pop up and give you all the commands it was about to throw in there. So you could actually and you wouldn't even necessarily have to apply them. You could just see what it was going to do, which I thought was pretty cool.
Sounds cool.
But they change a bajillion things, and it's a huge pain in the butt, so you'd never do it on the CLI anyway. But if you wanted to see it, you could. Yeah.
I think for me, for example, one big problem which I really often find, and this is what we try to do from Unimas design as well, is smart defaults. Basically, give the user the power to do everything and anything, but also at the same time, software out of the box should just work. It should be smartly configured, and it should be smart enough to do everything right if the user doesn't want to touch it. So the default behavior has to be 100%. If the user wants to, influence that default behavior, give him the tools. And I think in so many software suites and any software we talk about, I really don't find this is the case where I think it really should be.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense, right? Have it pre-configured for what 90% of people are going to use and make all the options available if they want to change it. It seems like a very simple idea.
Yeah, it seems like a very, it's just logical. But then, going back like 5 episodes to my open source rant, any open source software you install, it's not smartly pre-configured. There is millions of options and everything you have to learn and read and set it up and all of that, right? And yeah, it's open source, and that's the whole rant, right? There is a justification for that. But even with commercial software, so often you deploy stuff and you have to read pages and pages to make it even do anything, right? And I know the world is not so simple, and unicorns and rainbows and all of that.
No,
But
version 7.
I think the software world, yeah, I think the software world could really start being just more user friendly and just more conscious and about what users are trying to do, and just out of the box make the software smart enough and good enough to cover the most widely used use cases. Remove frustration. Nobody likes frustration, so remove the frustration. And if you do that, everybody will be better off. And it's what we try to do with Unimas, right? Out of the box, Unimas just works. You don't have to touch anything. You want to go into the advanced settings and read through the 50 checkboxes that we have there, they are there, but you don't need to. It will just work out of the box. You don't know what some setting does. There is always in Unimas, like one of our main design principles is if there is a setting which is not self-obvious, right there has to be a question mark or a help text or something that explains it, right? You shouldn't have to Google stuff to find out what inverse mode for search does. What does inverse mode do? It's not self-obvious. So we have right there, you just click one button and there is a help, 2 paragraphs of help. And you have just removed frustrations from the user. You have just removed Googling every time they forget what that particular option that they use once every month does. It's simple things like that. And I feel just for some reason, most vendors or software companies don't do that. And I don't understand it.
I know this is completely off topic, but how many languages do you have Unimas in?
You mean translation?
Yeah.
Just English.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah,
Remove frustration. Hello.
Yeah, internalization. It's another one of those things like dark mode. It seems super simple, but once you get down into what actually needs to be done to properly support I18N, so I18N is the standard that you for translations. Basically, it's not simple at all.
I figured as much.
I think it just depends too, because there's a lot of projects, especially open source, that started off with like a specific tool set. And for something like Unimas, I'm sure you guys have like an interface that all hardware has to comply to. So if you're going to do a reboot, every device you support, or I guess you would do it through commands, but if you're going to do a backup, every router should probably have, or each class of each piece of hardware probably has these sets of functions that have to be on it. So everything's kind of uniform to add things into the system and things work.
So actually here I can tell you that not at all. So every device behaves completely differently in the command line. There is no unified command line, right?
No, I just mean the way that your app interacts. Like when I'm talking about just interfaces in general. Like if I'm going to have a router, I want to be able to pull a backup, and then you would have how you need to interact with that device to do that thing. But I'm just saying that a lot of legacy projects don't use interfaces, or they don't abstract things so that everything's uniform when they add a new device they support.
Yeah, that's about internal code design and
right.
Code architecture, which of course is a really big topic unto itself, right? And so for me, for example, or for Unimas, it was lucky that when we started writing it, we basically knew what we were doing and how we were doing things, and we planned into the future. And Unimas on the backend, it's written really well, and it takes us usually under a day to write a new driver to add support for a new vendor. But yes, this is because of how we designed it. This is because of our internal core architecture and structure and the internal frameworks that we use. Because at this point, it really our device interaction, what we call our core, is an internal framework at this point after 4 years of development. And I definitely agree that as projects grow, and especially for old projects, internally, they might be a mess, but the mess internally doesn't have to translate to a mess to the user side and the user experience.
Right. I'm just saying, because you guys started off that way and kept things clean, it's kind of easier to give them that. But there's a lot of projects that people have built internally that I try to kind of look through their code base to help them with, but it's like they keep trying to add features. And as they add features, it wasn't really what they intended the software to be initially. So then you have these big monolithic apps that it's like, well, how do you figure out a sensible default depending on what industry is using the software, or what the person wants to get out of it? So I could see how trying to come up with sensible defaults for certain applications would be very difficult. Like if it's gonna be a clustered application, or what features they're gonna use. Like especially with something like Mikrotik, like a router. I mean, I guess they could spend time thinking of all the common scenarios people would use, but I'm just saying that, like, sometimes it's hard with sensible defaults because there's always going to be people that are going to complain that it's not set up to do this thing.
Oh, I don't think that's the point, right? Let's, for example, say OSPF on Mikrotik, right? I mean, 90% of us deploy a standard type say, right? You have a loopback bridge, you have a loopback address, that loopback address is the router ID, then you have some networks, then you have some interfaces. You could probably make a template that would configure it some way. Great example here, I think, is, probably all of you know that I hate any automatic and automagic things and buttons, right? But one thing which I love is the DHCP setup in Mikrotik. Because it's not something automagical or automatical, it's just a shortcut that creates all of the things like the pool and networks and everything for you. It doesn't do any magic, it's just a shortcut, right? So it's just a really nice workflow or interface flow that basically takes away going into 10 menus, into next, fill in some forms and finish, right? You could easily make that for OSPF creation. You could easily make like a setup OSPF, and then you fill in like which interface, what IP address, next, finish, And it's not magic, it's just a shortcut, right? It's just like a configuration template. And yeah, I completely get what you mean by, when you have a huge software that does many things, how do you make it fit? And I think my answer to that would be the Linux philosophy, right? It shouldn't be one huge monolith that does 10,000 things. Right. It should be many small things that interconnect and do each thing well, which I know is nice in theory. And when, as a contractor, going back to that, when you come into a project that's already, 10 years in making, and to remake that monolith would take another 3 years, that's not possible, obviously. So, yeah, the real world is messy.
Indeed. All right, guys, we've hit 2 hours. You want to stick a fork in it? I think Thomas has to go to bed. All right, Thomas, you're up first.
Yeah, we lost him.
No, he's back.
There you are.
He's back.
There you are.
Sorry,
Good,
I just had to catch my breath for a second. All right, I'm good now. Thomas, if people want to get a hold of you out on the internet, how do they do that?
So, as always, I'm very easy to find. Just Google my name. And, of course, there is always unimus.net. So just go to Unimus. There is a live chat. You can ask anybody. If somebody else picks up the live chat, just guess for me. And otherwise, I have a YouTube channel, all the social networks. You'll find me if you want to find me.
All right. Davey, if people want to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Yeah, I think the Slack channel is going to be the best way. People have been getting in touch with me that way, just private messaging me. So it's David Atias.
All right. Otherwise, your website would be?
Oh, pennytone.com. Or you could get me at david@pennytone.com.
Why do I have to keep beating you guys over the head for this stuff? Promote your stuff. Promote your stuff.
That's what I have you for.
Jesus. Nick, if people want to get a hold of you, how do they go about that?
I have just a crappy static website. It's my last name, ARELLANO.io. I have a bunch of contact information on there, and also through the Slack channel.
All right, baller.
TheBrothersWISP.
So if you want to get a hold of Greg, it's greg@gregshole.com. Also, if you want to drop us an email just in general, contact us at TheBrothersWISP.com. If you want to jump on this Slack channel everybody's talking about, all of the cool kids are doing it. It's patreon.com/TheBrothersWISP. You jump in there, I will fire you like a missile, guided missile, straight to your inbox, an invite for Slack. And it's full of interesting channels with good conversation. There's no such thing as a dumb question, unless it's Dave, of course, or a dumb answer. Unless it's Dave, of course. Oh, there you go. Thank you, Dave. I knew you were gonna come in handy today. Comic relief.
You know, I made it through the entire podcast behaving myself,
and then I talk trash. I'm so proud of you. I still have to give you beef because you're my boy. So yeah. jump in there. A lot of good discourse, a lot of good conversation, a ton of information. I'm constantly learning. We're getting more server guys in there talking about servery stuff, and I've been out of that game for so long that I actually enjoy hearing that. People talking about their, whether they're like Postgres or MySQL or MariaDB or, just hearing the ins and outs of that sort of stuff and why people like which one they like. That stuff's over my head because I just haven't done it in so long. And normally the stuff I do is so light it doesn't matter anyway. I can do pretty much, I could make flat files and it would be fine. But please, questions, comments, keep them coming. We're still looking to get some international flavor in here. As Thomas says, looking for people in different industries. We MSPs, guys doing voice, guys doing SCADA. I don't care. As long as it's interesting and you're an interesting person, even if you're a boring person, jump on here. We'd be happy to talk to you. Tips, videos, guys, keep that coming. Anybody who wants to join in, share, give back, do it. You're brave. Be brave. Expand your comfort zone. Thank you, guys.
Lighting up the tower so people can start searching. Shooting up the web in neighborhoods, net surfing. We got horrible jokes, we're loud and annoying, but we're informative facts, we're not disappointing. Just give us a listen, cause fun is the mission. I'm telling you, you don't know what you are missing. Ideas and some good comedy given. If you missed the show already, don't worry, you're forgiven.